Welcome to This Is Money podcast. I'm Georgie Frost, and joining me and editor Simon Lambert today is personal finance editor Sam Barker. And coming up, Britain's most popular savings product, the humble premium bond, makes major changes. Find out your chances of being a millionaire. Plus, should wealthier savers lock their money away for 5 years now, ahead of rates falling? Also today, inflation remains in double digits, leading to speculation that interest rates could peak at 5%. But is the Bank of England's money printing spree to blame for all of this? Petrol prices are falling, but the cost of our food shop, that's hitting us hard. And it's the supermarket's budget ranges that are soaring up by as much as 80% in a year. Why are prices so high, and when will they fall? Plus, Nectar versus Club Card. Sainsbury's take on Tesco in the loyalty card war. Don't forget to stay up to date with all the latest breaking money news. Just go to thisismoney.co.uk or download the app.
Don't forget, you can stay on top of what's going on in the markets by tuning in to the Digest and Invest podcast by eToro. Go to your regular podcast platform and listen on the go. Digest and Invest by eToro, the podcast for those interested in trading and investing.
But first, more than 66 years after their launch, premium bonds are easily the most popular savings deal in Britain. Almost 22.4 million of us will enter the monthly prize draw, a third of the entire UK population. And in the past year, two big changes by NS&I gave savers even more reason to invest. That's despite plenty of competition from savings rates finally rising at banks and building societies. But what really are your chances of winning big? Sam, welcome. Firstly, what are the changes to premium bonds and why are they so popular?
Thank you very much, Georgie. So in a nutshell, what NS&I have done is make it more likely that you will win smaller prizes. So I think when we think about premium bonds, we take them out, and the thing that we've all got in mind is the £1 million prize. I think that's what everybody obviously really wants. They want to get that knock on the door from Agent Millions, knocking on the door and telling them you've won £1 million. But obviously, most of the sort of payouts, they are far smaller than that, ranging from £25 up to £100,000. Now, at the lower end of that, £25 is just a nice kind of windfall. The upper end of that, it's still, a life-changing amount of money. And really, what NS&I have done, the latest premium bond changes, is made it far, far more likely that you will win a prize of £50,000 or £100,000. So, is that retire early money? Probably not, but it will make an enormous difference to your quality of life. So I think it's a very good thing for premium bond savers, and I think it's also quite a savvy thing for NS&I to do, because firstly they were getting slightly outgunned on rate by private providers. NS&I, they're normally quite slow to change their rates, but they obviously had to increase them in order to stay competitive. But I think it also addresses the number one kind of issue with the customers have with NS&I, apart from customer service, which is I've got loads of money in my premium bonds and I never win. And there's a whole host of kind of theories that customers have about, I bought bonds at the wrong time, or, you're only going to win if you buy bonds in a big chunk, or bonds from this year don't count, So I think it's quite a good PR move from NS&I to say, okay, well, those £1 million prizes, the two £1 million prizes a month, that's not going to change. But we are going to put our thumb on the scale slightly and increase the amount of lower level prizes, which is still going to be, as I say, that's a life-changing sum of money. For a lot of people, that means paying off the mortgage, or it means not having financial worries for, many years to come. Unless, of course, you go to the casino and kind of, put it all on black.
Yeah. I mean, Simon, a £50,000 windfall or £100,000, it sounds lovely, doesn't it? But if you do have a fair amount in premium bonds, what really are your chances of getting that? I mean, are you better off just being a bit sensible and just putting it in a nice high interest savings account? We'll get more into detail of that, about how long you should lock away for in our next story. But Simon, what do you reckon? Premium bonds?
I think yes, but I think that it comes with a caveat. So we talked about this maybe a month or so ago, the last time the premium bonds rate was raised, the average price fund rate, and about how this was perhaps the best place for your easy access cash now? Or actually, was it the best place for your easy access cash now? Question mark. So the things for that are the rate that you are going to get on your premium bonds. The average price fund rate at 3.3% is pretty much even with the best easy access rate. The best easy access rate is about 3.6, 3.55%. So there's not a huge difference there. You can get a premium bonds pretty quickly. They aren't technically completely instant access. It will take you about 2 working days to get your money out of the premium bonds. So if there's a weekend in the middle, then it's going to take you longer. 2 days, most people could probably wait 2 days to get their hands on their money. If it's money that you can't wait 2 days to get your hands on, don't put it in the premium bonds. Then it comes down to the question of tax. So the prices are tax-free as well. So that's the other thing. You've got to compare this actually perhaps to the rate on a cash ISA, not to the rate on a standard savings account. But then you need to think about, am I going to get the average rate? And actually, you're probably not going to get the average rate. So there's a couple of things going on there. One, you could be luckier or you could be unluckier. So it very much depends on luck. Are they a good deal for you? Are you feeling lucky? The other thing is, statistically speaking, if you don't have a large amount of money in there, you're probably not going to get the average price fund rate. Having said that, on the flip side, if you put your money into the sort of one of the top easy access savings deals that pays 3.3 to 3.6%, you're guaranteed to not win £1 million, £100,000 or £50,000. And in fact, you're guaranteed to get the return that the account says that it's going to give you. And however lucky you are that year, however lucky you're feeling, however many superstitious things that you do, however much you make your own luck, your savings account will not pay you more money. Okay? Yeah. You cannot write to your bank and say, do you know what? I am actually feeling exceptionally lucky. I've got great karma. I've been doing really good things. Ticket? You're not going to get it, but you lose your money on a lottery ticket, and actually the odds on the lottery are worse.
There you go.
So that's the flip side of the premium bonds. Chances are you aren't going to win a huge sum of money, but you might do. And actually, the chances of that have got better. And I think that it's interesting what Sam said about everybody focuses on the £1 million prize, but actually it's the other prizes that maybe we should be thinking a bit more about, and they fly under the radar a little bit. They've massively upped the £100,000 or £50,000 prizes, and it has very much flown under the radar, because I think that everybody does think about the £1 million prize, but they also don't just think about the £1 million prize. There's another prize they also think about, the £25 one, at the lowest possible one, and they don't think about those bigger ones. So basically, the way the maths works out is, if you have a £5,000 holding in the premium bonds, your chances of winning £1 million are 1 in 12.05 million now, compared to May 2022, a year ago, that was 1 in 11.78 million. So you've got less likely to win £1 million. But your chances of winning £100,000, last year, it was 1 in 3.93 million. It is now 1 in 388,500. That is a massive difference in the odds. And then your chances of winning £50,000 last year, 1 in 2.14 million. Now, 1 in 193,000. Again, that is a colossal difference to the odds of winning a sum of money, which, as Sam said, you're not going to be retiring on, but 50 grand tax-free is a life-changing sum for many people.
Indeed, it's the gamification, isn't it? I suppose it makes savings fun, and if 22-odd million people are saving, that is not a bad thing. We're going to stick with saving, because you have a story on your website which asks, because I want to know what else is out there if you don't want premium bonds. Should wealthier savers lock money away for 5 years now ahead of rates falling? Experts say that short fixes and easy access may not be your best bet. So Sam, just firstly, is this a question just for wealthier savers, or is this for everyone?
It's arguably it's a little bit of both. I think for people who have got large sums of money, because I think the key thing with bonds is that this needs to be money that you don't need, and you're not going to need it for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, 5 years. And obviously, the more money that you've got to put into those, the greater the return, the more reason for often doing it. So I think it's possibly more of a wealthy savers have got more riding on it, basically. But it is, to a certain extent, I think you're right. It is a question for everybody.
You've been speaking to savings guru James Blower for this article. So it's not just wealthy savers, but I get your point. What are people doing at the moment? What is James saying? Where are we looking at the minute to put our money, and where does he think we should?
So at the moment, most savers are, putting their money into fixed rate accounts. And this is quite an interesting kind of customer change, because all the while the rates were low, there was a huge sum of money being put into easy access account. And this is kind of Bank of England figures. Now what we're seeing is more and more savers putting their money into fixed rate accounts. It seems at the moment that most savers are preferring shorter term fixed rates. So, 1, 2, 3 years. And the reason probably is that the rates that you get for locking your money away for, 1, 2 or 3 years are not that much lower than if you were to lock your money away for 5 years. So people say, well, what's the point in me, locking it away for 5 years? It's a long time. I don't know what's going to happen, in that time. And just to sort of, add a little bit of context there, the best 1 year fixed rate deal currently pays 4.52%, whereas the best 5 year deal pays 5.65%. So, obviously you're only losing out on a sort of a tiny amount of interest, and you're getting an awful lot more flexibility. So I suppose then we sort of come on to the sort of the great question, which is, what's going to happen with savings rates this time? And to answer that, you need to answer, well, what's going to happen with Bank of England base rate in that time? Now, if I could answer that question with any accuracy, I wouldn't be here having this conversation. I'd be sitting on my yacht, cruising around the Caribbean. But it does seem that most people are pretty aligned on rates, Bank of England base rate falling. Maybe possibly there's an outside chance it could nudge up ever so slightly. But then what we're likely to see is falling maybe to around, it depends on who you ask, but 2.5% to 3% is probably likely to be a kind of a good bet for an average rate.
By when are we talking? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years?
Well, to a large extent, it sort of depends who you ask. But the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is obviously the arm of the state, which kind of oversees kind of big fiscal spending, they think that inflation is likely to fall to 2.9% by the end of the year. And what that's likely to mean is that there's less incentive for the Bank of England to keep base rate high. So Capital Economics, which is a well-respected economic research consultancy, they think that in response, the Bank of England will cut base rate to 3% by the end of next year, so by the end of 2024. And then by the end of 2025, we'll be looking at rates of around 2.5%. So what that is going to mean in turn is that the returns that savers will get on new fixed rate products will fall. So at the moment, it may be a smart bet with 5 year rates running at around 5.65% for the best deal. It may be a smart bet to take out a longer term fixed rate now, because whilst you will be getting slightly less than you would with a 1 year, obviously you're going to be making that back over the term, that 5 year term, provided that everybody I've just quoted is right, and that that this is actually what happens, and that is the great gamble.
Yeah. Forecasts are never wrong, Sam. They are
never ever
absolutely correct. Simon, what are your views?
Well, the key question I think here is not just for savers on how long they should lock their money away for, but also when it comes down to if you are going to lock money away for 5 years, should you be investing it instead? Because in a 5-year horizon is the sort of minimum horizon that experts will tell you need to invest over in order to try to ride out the potential volatility in the markets and to be thinking long term. Now, you can obviously make a personal decision to invest for less time than that, but the less time you decide to invest for, the more you increase your chances of potentially your money being down when you want to go get it. Now, that doesn't mean it definitely will be down. And in fact, if you look at the Barclays Equity Gilt Study 2022, Barclays Equity Gilt Study is a very long-running and definitive report on investment returns. It looks at the UK stock market returns dating back to 1899. And it shows that the longer investors held shares for over any period within this, so any period within that time span from 1899 to 2022, 123 years, right? The greater the chance that they've outperformed cash. Over any 2 years of holding shares, they outperformed cash 69% of the time. Over any 5 years, this rose to 76%. Over any 10 years, it rose to 91%. That's why you're told to invest over the long term. The longer you hold for, the greater your chance of beating cash. Now, the thing that matters here is that cash, as measured by this, will be pretty much the base rate, okay? And what we've established here is that you can lock away your money for better than the base rate. But better than the base rate isn't that much better than the base rate, is it? 4.6% top deal versus 4.25%. And, the base rate is meant to be going to 4.5% soon. Will that 5-year fix rise when the base rate goes to 4.5%? Arguably not. Most people think that most of the rate increase from savings has already come. But 4.6% is a pretty good return. If you look at long-term average stock market returns, you're looking at maybe real returns, certainly over the most recent decades, of perhaps 4.5%, 5% a year. Now, those are real returns, though. Those are above inflation. In years like this, when inflation is 10%, you can't expect to just be making that. Those figures mean you're definitely going to make 14.5%. That's not the way it works. But it's an average annual return. But you do look at that 4.6% and think, well, it's very, very close to the returns that you might be getting from the stock market. And those returns from the stock market are not guaranteed, and you could potentially lose some money. Whereas that 4.6%, it's you're locked in. You're going to get that rate for the 5 years. But I think the important thing to remember is that, as with this, whenever we talk about it, it's not an all or nothing affair. It's not you must put all of your money into a savings account, or you must put all of your money into an investment ISA. You can put some money into one and some money into the other. And I think I would encourage most people who are thinking about locking cash up for 5 years to think, could I invest some of this money, if not all of this money, but could I invest some of this money to see whether I can get a better return from that?
All right. That's it for part one.
I'm joined now by Sam North of eToro for our weekly update on what's been happening on the markets. Sam, how's the past week been?
Hi, Simon. Yeah, after a run of positive weeks across many major stock markets around the world, we pulled back a little bit this week. To be honest, no particular reason. A lot of people might put it down to profit taking. The VIX, which a lot of people view as the fear index, is actually at multi-month lows. Part of this feels like it could be the calm before the storm. But that said, on the flip side, I do feel pretty confident about markets. Most days this week have been flat as the market continues to digest earnings, which haven't been as bad as many people thought. On the UK side of things, inflation came in high, and we are now expecting 3 more rate hikes from the Bank of England because of it. So not a great look for those of us that are in the UK. I mean, the FTSE is on pretty much its all-time high. The pound is the strongest it's been for a while, but beneath the surface, yeah, it doesn't look too good.
Okay, and what do we have to look forward to next week?
Yeah, so from Saturday, we enter the Federal Reserve blackout period, so there won't be any comments from Fed officials until the next monetary policy decision, which is the 3rd of May. I would, however, be keeping an ear out to the last minute on Friday just to see if they want to sneak in any last minute comments ahead of that. Data wise, next week is actually relatively quiet, but a few things do stick out. We have the US PCE number, which is the Fed's favoured inflation metric, and we also have French, German, Japanese and Spanish inflation next week too, as well as the Bank of Japan policy announcement on Friday. It kind of feels like we're just going to meander along until the next rate decision from the Fed and let earnings really drive the overall direction before that. Speaking of earnings, the main ones that stick out to me next week include Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Alphabet, Visa, Meta, Boeing, Exxon and Chevron. They are all reporting. So a busy week for earnings, relatively quiet data-wise, but I'm sure there'll be a few surprises along the way.
That is quite some list of big-name companies. We'll see how that one unfolds. Sam, thank you very much. Speak to you next week.
Thank you, Simon.
Welcome back. The latest inflation figures were released this week, and while there was a dip, it wasn't as much as expected. 10.4% to 10.1% forecasts had been expecting around 9.8%. Food costs, energy and pet products pushed it up. Following the news, though, economists rounded on the Bank of England, blaming its money printing spree for fueling double-digit inflation, just as we face another painful interest rate hike to bring it back down. Simon, before we delve into the figures, Economics 101, if you would, the Bank of England's money printing spree, what are we really talking about? Give it to us in layman's terms, Simon. What is it? Why was it done? What's the impact been on the average person?
Sadly, for the purposes of television newsreels of the future, it didn't involve ramping up the printing presses and printing huge sums of money that just flew out the door of the Bank of England onto the streets of London, where everybody ran around gathering them up. It involved quantitative easing, which involves the Bank of England injecting money into the financial system by creating money, buying bonds of financial institutions. That puts money into the system, and then they hope that it sort of trickles down. That's the main thing that gets referred to as money printing. We also had some very loose monetary policy in things like the funding for lending policy, where they were effectively enabling banks to lend at super, super low rates. And when banks lend money to people, banks create money themselves. They write your mortgage for £300,000. They press a button on the computer. They do some checks first, apparently. They press a button on the computer, and there's a new £300,000 in the economy. Woohoo! And the way that monetary policy works is that the MPC sets rates, the base rate, that then influences the funding costs for banks and building societies, and they then pass those rate rises on to their borrowers, which makes money more expensive to borrow. And if you make things more expensive, generally the demand for it goes down. It's a very imprecise lever to pull and can take some effect. So there's all those things that have been going on. And I think actually you need to look beyond the money printing. You need to look at the QE, the first round of QE after the financial crisis, which actually didn't really cause inflation, despite major fears that it would do. You have to look at funding for lending, which was the Bank of England trying to get lending going and really encourage banks to start lending. That was the thing that actually finally got the property market, for example, moving up post-financial crisis. Then you have to look at all of those years of super low interest rates. Then you have to look at what happened when COVID hit, where rates were cut again, even further, went down to a new record low of 0.1%. QE was ramped up again. The Bank of England primed those printing presses and got busy with it. And also the way that the Bank of England helped fund the government at the time for all of the COVID rescue packages, the biggest one of which, for example, was furlough, where companies were encouraged not to make people redundant or cut their jobs and instead put them onto furlough at reduced wages, and the government was picking up the tab for that to try and stop mass unemployment. Whether all of these measures helped the economy or hindered the economy is a matter for another day, and one that we have discussed at length on this podcast. But what they're being accused of doing here is dramatically increasing the inflation that the UK has suffered from. And the UK is suffering worse than most from high inflation.
Sam, do you agree with that? Do you agree? Not necessarily Simon's accusing the Bank of England of... Actually, you are, Simon, aren't you? You're agreeing with the economists there, aren't you? You're saying
Andrew Sentence, a former Bank of England rate setter, told MPs that the bank's long period of money printing
numbers, Simon.
And low interest rates had quite significantly contributed to the inflation that we're now experiencing.
There you go, then.
I'm merely suggesting that he may possibly be right.
Yes. Well, I would listen to you, Simon, first. Sam, is there another position to be had here? I mean, assume the Bank of England don't go, yeah, actually, you're right. Sorry. My bad.
Well, it's a massive question. And I think the Bank of England, the best system which they have come up with, actually the best system that any central bank has come up with for making these decisions, is to get a group of people in a room to basically have a massive argument every month. And even then, I can't think of a time when there has been a unanimous decision on anything. So I think it's one of those questions where it just comes to a constant ongoing, discussion about what should we do this month? Where do we need to set, where do we need to set that boundary? But I think, the idea that the Bank of England has created an awful lot of money and they've basically, whizzed it into the economy, and that won't bring down the kind of buying power of money generally. I think that does hold water. I think it's difficult. I mean, arguably, the Bank of England, when they see inflation kind of rumbling away, and they have to make the very difficult decision about what do we do with base rate. Arguably, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Possibly they put it up too quickly, and that has been a difficult thing for many people to adjust to, with things like mortgages, the increase in kind of the price of new mortgages and loans. I'm not saying the Bank of England were wrong to take that action, but I think that for a lot of people, after years of just no base rate changes at all, it was a very difficult thing to adjust to.
Yeah.
And I think we haven't yet seen that feed through into masses of people being unable to afford their mortgage, for example. But it could be that's is part of the pressure that people are now feeling.
I think one crucial difference between the round of QE, the COVID stuff, and the post-financial crisis stuff, and the bank's actions, and actually central banks' actions around the world, and one reason why the finger is being pointed at them, is that the reason why the first round maybe didn't cause so much inflation, or one of the reasons why the first round didn't cause so much inflation, is because there was this trickle-down effect. It was put into the financial system. It caused massive asset price inflation, but it didn't cause inflation in the real economy in the same way. The second time round, most of the QE support, governments were giving money directly to people, and that makes a big difference. If you think about furlough, for example, furlough is effectively giving money directly to people in the form of what would have been their wages, because otherwise companies were going to axe them. It gave money directly to companies. It gave money directly to people who wanted to go out and have lunch or dinner and not pay full price. There's all these things that went on. And if you give money, if you create money and then you give money directly to people, there is an argument that has a much greater inflationary impact than creating money and then just sort of giving it to the financial system. They didn't just give it to the financial system, but you understand what I mean. And then the other thing is I think there's also the accusation that they sat on their hands too long and they didn't raise rates soon enough, and that means that they've had to raise rates too quickly in too short a space of time. It was abundantly clear, I would argue, and have argued many times with this podcast, that the inflationary pressures in the economy could be spotted way, way, way before the inflation hit, and that actually the emergency stuff when COVID first hit and the world went, whoa, and into shutdown and everybody freaked out, come summer or autumn of 2020, it was abundantly clear that actually consumer economies like the UK's had proved remarkably resilient and adept at dealing with a lot of that, and lots of companies had pivoted and things like that, and people's sentiment had not been dented in the way that you would have expected it. To give the examples I always give, You couldn't get your hands on a hot tub for love nor money. You couldn't get your hands on garden furniture for love nor money. You weren't allowed to leave the country, so people couldn't go on holiday for quite a bit of that period. But those people who could leave the country were leaving the country in droves when they could in the weeks that they were allowed to go to country X or country Y, and complaining madly when it turned out that they couldn't go there because someone had changed the rules 20 minutes before. And also, all of those people who couldn't go abroad were spending unbelievable sums of money on renting holiday lets in the UK, which was another thing that you couldn't get for love nor money in the summer of 2020 unless you fancied doing a 2-week holiday in the centre of Milton Keynes, for example. And even then you probably couldn't manage to do that. So I think there were those little things that the Bank of England didn't look at, because they tend to look more at the serious data than the anecdotal stuff. And actually they probably should have gone, do you know what, maybe we shouldn't have interest rates at 0.1% right now. Maybe we could get them back up to the crazy heights of 0.25 or 0.5%. And I think if they'd moved a bit earlier, and this is not just Bank of England, it's central banks around the world, if they'd moved a little bit earlier, they might not have had the same inflation problem quite as badly and then had to ratchet rates up quite as quickly as they did, allowing for the fact that a lot of that inflation has been imported via very high energy prices, Ukraine war, etc.
Well, I joked, Simon, earlier about listening to you first, but had they listened to the podcast, they would have picked up on your wise words many years ago. Sam's explained or outlined the fact, Simon, that inflation is still likely to fall, despite the latest figures being not great. Interest rates likely to fall. But before we get there, there's some speculation currently 4.25% could go to 5%. What are your thoughts?
This is off the back of yesterday's inflation number. Nice little freak out. Inflation was expected to fall below double digits. Inflation didn't fall below double digits. Inflation came in at 10.1%. 10.1% inflation versus 9.9% inflation isn't a colossal difference, but it is the difference between inflation sticking above double digits and inflation falling below double digits. So there's an impact of that. Whether the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee is going to be swayed by the fact that inflation was slightly above 10% rather than slightly below 10%, I wouldn't like to say, but I doubt that they will be. I think that we're still going to see a peak for rates round about the same place that we thought we were going to see a peak for rates, and it's not going to change dramatically unless inflation suddenly spikes up quite a lot more.
Well, let's delve into some of the figures then, if we would. And the main thing that stood out, I think, for everyone was, well, the price of everything's rocketed since the start of last year, but food inflation was 19.1%. I was delving into the figures. It's an exciting job, a spreadsheet like no other. Some items like olive oil, cheese, up 40% on last year. Now, a drop in the wholesale food prices globally, I suppose that's the good news. That's what we're seeing at the moment. But why aren't we seeing that reflected in the price at the supermarkets? Sam, just give us a quick explainer. Why are food prices so high? Why particularly some other items and not others?
So food prices are really high, and there's a long list of reasons, unfortunately, why that is the case. So I'll be as brief as possible. Some of it is UK, so domestic issues, and some of it is kind of global issues as well. So in the UK, we've got labour shortages on farms, which has been rumbling along since Brexit, really. UK and overseas, things like the incredibly high price of fertiliser. So it's not always something that initially comes to mind when we're thinking about food prices, but without fertiliser, there's no modern agriculture. It is a huge thing, and an awful lot of fertiliser in Europe came from Ukraine and Russia. It also affects, it's not just the cost of plants, because around half of the crops we grow are fed to animals as feed. It also affects the price of meat. So I'm not going to get into, there's a whole host of problems with using as much fertilizer as we do or did in terms of health of topsoil and what happens when it gets into the rivers and so on. But the fertilizer point is not very sexy, but it is a massive part of the reason why food prices are so high. Then you get on to basically everything else. So increased transport costs at every single step of the chain, increased energy prices. You could look at food, growing from the fields to getting onto your plate. There's an enormous number of companies every single step of the way growing it suppliers moving it, shipping it, selling it, their costs have gone up. So energy prices, overheads, fuel prices. Then you get into kind of food specific issues. So, for example, with eggs, obviously a massive staple, there is a significant issue there with avian flu, bird flu. That's led to millions and millions of birds being culled in the UK alone, and that's basically led to a shortage of eggs, and that's part of the reason why we're seeing a huge increase in the price of eggs, for example. So that's in a nutshell partly why food prices are so high, and in response to that, suppliers and supermarkets jack their prices up. So yes, you're right, but there is a little glimmer of hope that these prices could start to fall because wholesale prices are dropping too. But it takes time. This is the crucial point. It takes time for that to be seen in the prices that consumers pay at the checkouts. So 3 to 9 months. So we're likely to see food prices start to fall during the course of this year and possibly from next month onwards. But obviously we're talking about falling from a 45-year high. So it's a little glimmer of hope, but we're in quite a sticky situation to start with.
We are indeed. Simon, we're likely to see some of those savings when they come passed on. I only ask you that because in one of your articles, you ask, are supermarkets ramping up costs unnecessarily? We're seeing own brand labels going up by 80%. It doesn't seem like the supermarket's doing much to help us.
There's a question here as to who's responsible for this. The supermarkets have been pointing fingers at the brand name food manufacturers. The financial results of global mega companies that make brand name stuff. I'm thinking, your Heinz baked beans, the stuff that Unilever makes, from Marmite to Ben and Jerry's, all that kind of stuff. They have said that they're facing a lot of cost inflation from their own suppliers, for the energy, the logistics and everything. But they've also said they're passing that on and that they've managed to pass that on. Now, the supermarkets are arguing that too much of that is being passed on, and then the supermarkets are having to then sell these items to the customers and put their own margin on top of it, which, to be honest, supermarket margins are wafer thin. They work on the basis of selling lots and lots of stuff. And they're saying, look, it's not our fault that your tin of Heinz tomato soup has gone up by so much. You need to blame Heinz for this. Consumers, I think, do tend to blame the supermarkets, perhaps more than the companies that make the stuff. But then there's lots of other stuff that supermarkets sell that doesn't come with a brand name on it, and of which the price has gone up substantially. So and supermarkets obviously also have their own cost inflation, wages, transport, energy, all that kind of stuff. So it's quite difficult to put your finger on exactly who is to blame here and whether there are any major villains of this piece and who these villains are. But I definitely think that more of the finger is pointed at the brand name food manufacturers than it is at the supermarkets, who, if you look at their figures, it shows that their revenues have gone up by lots because obviously the price of the stuff that they are selling has gone up. So the revenue goes up, but their profits have fallen. That would indicate that the supermarkets aren't cashing in on this on a widespread overall scale, but that's not to say that there are some places within it that they're not making a pretty penny.
Sam, I got asked yesterday what we can do to cut costs at the supermarket, and looking at all the figures from Kantar and the like, it seems we're doing it already. We're buying more frozen stuff than fresh stuff. We're shopping around. We're buying brand own. We're going to the German discounters. Anything else that we're missing?
I mean, those are what you've listed is the main ones. I think when it comes to saving money at the supermarkets, there's a couple of big camps of ways of doing it. So there's the ways which are easier, more accessible, don't require as much time. And those are, as you've just listed, really, shop around, maybe look at budget ranges, maybe look at discount supermarkets. And consumer behavior from the likes of Kantar suggests that people are doing that. What is really interesting at the moment is that footfall, so to supermarkets, is increasing. Consumers are visiting more supermarkets to do their shopping, and they are visiting them more often. So what this suggests, along with the increasing market share of the likes of Aldi and Lidl, is that consumers are going to the cheaper supermarkets, getting what they can from there. Obviously, there's a limited range at those supermarkets compared to the bigger players, and then they are moving on to the likes of Asda, Tesco, Sainsbury's, etc., and topping up with maybe the bits that they're getting the nice bits from there, or they're getting the things they couldn't get from Aldi and Lidl. So to a certain extent, we're doing that already. And the other kind of massive way of bringing costs down, as you say, is to focus on budget food items. Rather than buying Heinz baked beans, maybe I'll try out Tesco own brand baked beans and see if they're if that trade-off is worth it for me. And this is where we get onto, I think, one of the kind of big injustices with food price inflation is that this is a two-tier system. So yes, food prices are up across the board, although actually it's not strictly speaking true. There are some food prices which have stayed flat or even fallen slightly, but by and large, we're talking massive increases in the price of food. Supermarket budget ranges and the cost of items in the discount supermarkets, so Aldi and Lidl, has risen at a far steeper rate than the price of more premium foods or foods in the traditional mainstream supermarkets. So whilst it is still cheaper to go out and shop at Aldi and Lidl and look at the discount ranges, you are saving far less proportionally by doing that than you would have a year ago. And this actually carries through even into if we were to look at different sorts of meat. So we were going through the numbers yesterday. Just take beef mince. It's a fairly cheap way of bulking a meal up, been done for generations. The price of beef mince is increasing far quicker than the price of steak, for example. So if you are trying to save money, it is far harder for it was, whereas if you're fairly affected by the cost of living, but it wasn't crippling you, it's more of an inconvenience. And the things that you would spend your money on, whilst they are more expensive, they are cheaper than cheaper in kind of relative terms. So as I say, it is a two-tier system. So then we get on to what are the other ways of saving money in the supermarkets, and this is where we get into things which are, there's a bit of a time and an energy element involved in saving money, and this is things like supermarket loyalty cards. This is things like visiting supermarkets at particular times. For example, if you're looking for discounted yellow sticker items, which I know from personal experience of doing consumer journalism, it is a massive thing for an awful lot of people. And the likes of Tesco, for example, had a very big push last year in expanding how much shelf space they gave to yellow sticker items. So they have acknowledged that it is a big thing for a lot of people, and that people are, as a consumer trend, doing it more. These are things where there is a convenience to money trade-off. You need to free up time at a certain point to go into the shops and shop around, do certain things. So, and also with loyalty cards, there is a kind of a privacy trade-off as well for a lot of people, and a time trade-off, because the supermarket loyalty schemes, we're going to come on to this I think in a bit more detail, but they are much more complicated than they used to be. The way that supermarkets offer you discounts, they are much more complicated, and understanding them and using them to their maximum potential, i.e. really making it worthwhile, worth your time and effort, and giving them your data, is much more complicated than it was. So I think, there's a few bits there, but what it all adds up to is it is much harder to save money in supermarkets. And if you really want to make a difference, it's going to involve a lot more of your time, a lot more of your energy.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because you hear a lot of journalists, personal finance journalists, giving people advice and all that sort of thing on how to cut costs. And you think, if you're a single parent working, I don't have time to time, when I go, and fussy kids and all that sort of jazz. But look, Simon, I'm coming to you for the last story. It is about loyalty cards. I do remember many moons ago on the podcast, getting my wallet out and hearing the cards clatter to the desk as you and Lee Boyce, formerly of this parish, rolled your eyes and said loyalty cards were not for you. I still have the card. I can't bring myself to go all modern tech and put it on my phone. But let the battle of loyalty cards commence, because Sainsbury's taking on Tesco Club cards. They're launching major changes to its Nectar loyalty cards. But Simon, what I really want to know is, do you care? Is it any good? Is it worth it? Has it changed your mind?
Life is too short for loyalty cards, is I
That's what
think
you
what I
said.
said to you
Yes,
when you
that's what
dropped
you
your
said.
loyalty cards onto the desk, them showing me the fine array that you had.
Good memory.
If ever there were the words of a man swaggering around a low inflation economy where money was cheap and the times were good, those were them. Hey, those words haven't aged well, have they? Life's too short for loyalty cards.
In that case, have you got a massive wallet now?
Guess who's got a photo of a club card on his phone?
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so actually, there you go. Right. And this is why I have a photo of a club card on my phone. Life is still too short to carry around a loyalty card. I back that up. Okay. Absolutely 100% stand by. As a man, my main objective in life is actually, it's not my main objective. One of my main objectives in life is to leave the house and to walk around with as little stuff that I am carrying as possible. Certainly, on my person, in my pockets or anything else. I don't want a wallet stuffed full of loyalty cards. The great advantage is you can have them on your phone nowadays. And as a modern day person, I'm rarely without my phone. So yeah, I've got a club card on my phone. I didn't used to carry a club card for years, despite the fact that me and my wife had a club card. Why did we have a club card? My wife used to work for Tesco. And if you work for Tesco, then you actually get a club card discount on stuff, but you had to show the club card. So having been, so we had that because we did our shopping online and everything like that. But I would regularly go into the shop when I lived in London, our supermarket around the corner was a Tesco. I'd go in there. Have you got a club card? No. I mean, I did technically have a club card. Did I have a club card on me? No. Did I get my 10%? Was the 10% discount possible for the family? Because, no, it wasn't. But what got me into having a club card is Tesco bringing in club card prices, or taking the photo of the club card and having it on my phone. Club card prices, it is a very cunning wheeze, and it's such a cunning wheeze that Sainsbury's has now done Nectar prices, and the Co-op has now doing member prices. What is this thing, in case you have not encountered it? You will find that there are certain items, not all items, but certain items that have two prices. Now, there is the price for you as a club card member, and there is the price for everybody else. And if you want the club card price, you need to be showing your club card, scanning your club card at the till. And the difference in cost is really quite substantial on some things. Now, there is some question as to what is going on here. Is the cost being substantially reduced for the club card member? Or is the cost being substantially bumped up for the non-club card member and the price has stayed roughly the same? Or is there some kind of middle ground where it sits? I think it's some kind of middle ground where it sits. I would argue that the price has not necessarily been dragged down by as much as it looks like, that actually there is an element where the price has also been pushed up. But this has been so successful at managing to increase the number of people using their club card that Tesco has continued with it and expanded it. And Sainsbury's has looked at this and gone, we like customer data too. We want more customer data. Why aren't people using Nectar as much? How are we going to get their customer data? See what Tesco's doing over there? Yeah, really annoying, isn't it? I know what, but you know what? It makes people scan their club cards, doesn't it? Yeah, should we do that with Nectar? Yeah,
Nectar
awesome.
is rubbish,
Shall we pretend
though.
we're helping people save money rather than gathering data? Yeah, let's do that.
Yes, exactly. Because you have to buy £1 million worth of products to get £2.50 off. It is rubbish.
Well,
but
that's
if you
the
think about
thing.
the club card,
Yeah,
good savings in theory.
Well, exactly. And actually, the value of club card rewards has gone down as well. There was some controversy over the fact that if you don't spend your club card points in Tesco, you can spend them somewhere else and they get multiplied up. And I must admit, I'm an absolute mug, right? Because I never realized that you could use these for paying for Eurotunnel tickets and that they multiplied up. So we've got all these points ratcheting up that my wife occasionally spends on getting some money off our shopping, because she's like, well, we should definitely use these things. But I should have been using them all the time for booking Eurotunnel tickets, because you get much more off for that. And there's lots of other ways that you can use them. Okay, there's going to be people listening to this just going, you're meant to be the editor of a personal finance website, you idiot. How do you not know this thing that millions of people are doing? Because I think life is too short for loyalty cards, apart from when I'm using them. But yeah, so, obviously it's much better to get these reduced prices. The monetary value of the reduced price to you versus not having that card in your pocket, be it a club card, be it a Next card, is going to be probably more substantially different than the amount of monetary gain that you would be making from spending the points. And the co-op's on this now too, as well. The co-op has introduced member prices, which I think are going to operate in pretty much exactly the same way. They've trialed this with some small things, including a meal deal, apparently, that's very popular. But now if you've got your co-op membership, and actually as a co-op member, you are genuinely a member, a co-op is a cooperative owned by its shopper members, then you will benefit from lower prices. Expect this to be wheeled out across every single supermarket in the country, probably within a year's time, I would imagine. I can't see that the rest of them are just not going to go, yeah, all right, let's do that as well.
Anyway, that's it. You can keep up to date with all the latest breaking money news. Just go to thisismoney.co.uk or download the app. And if you have any comments or questions for the team or anything you'd like them to look into, Simon?
You can email us at editor@thisismoney.co.uk. You can tweet us at thisismoney, and you can come to thisismoney.co.uk/podcast to join in the debate in reader comments.
And if you like our podcast, why not rate us wherever you found us? It helps other people find us too.
Don't forget, you can stay on top of what's going on in the markets by tuning in to the Digest and Invest podcast by eToro. Go to your regular podcast platform and listen on the go. Digest and Invest by eToro, the podcast for those interested in trading and investing.